Welcome everybody to the fourth workshop, fifth session of the day. Just a reminder that we will be recording the session, so if you don't want to be on camera or on the recording, then do keep your camera switched off. The other thing I will remind you of is that following this session, the final session at 4:30 with both bishops, we really hope that as many people as possible will go to that one. We've said we pick a mix throughout the day, but the session at 4:30 we'd really like everybody to get to if you possibly can. This last session is quite different to the others because it's going to involve a lot of talking with each other about quite challenging issues. So we're starting off with a couple of Bible readings, but beyond that, I'm going to be handing over to Will Mansell, who many of you may have met or come across. His most recent fame relates to the Feeding the 5,000 project. Then after Will, we'll be going over to Takesha Sargent, who is a music student at Cardiff University. And I rather flippantly said to her earlier, we knew she could be here because she's locked in at the moment, because everybody in Wales seems to be locked in, especially if they're a student. So it was a way of making sure we got Takesha here. So we're going to start off with a couple of Bible readings that did come out with the earlier materials to say, please have a look at these if you can. The first Bible reading, which doesn't want to play, is Nehemiah. Now there was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish kin. For there were those who said, with our sons and our daughters we are many, we must get grain so that we may eat and stay alive. There were also those who said, we are having to pledge our fields, our vineyards and our houses in order to get grain during the famine. And there were those who said, we are having to borrow money on our fields and vineyards to pay the king's tax. Now our flesh is the same as that of our kindred. Our children are the same as their children, and yet we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have been ravished. We are powerless, and our fields and vineyards now belong to others. I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these complaints. After thinking it over, I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are all taking interest from your own people. And I called a great assembly to deal with them and said to them, as far as we were able, we have brought back our Jewish kindred who had been sold to other nations. But now you are selling your own kin, who must then be bought back by us. They were silent and could not find a word to say, so I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations our enemies? Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us stop this taking of interest. Restore to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards and their houses, and the interest on money, grain, wine, and oil that you have been exacting from them. Then they said, we will restore everything and demand nothing more from them. We will do as you say. And I called the priests and made them take an oath to do as they had promised. I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out everyone from house and from property who does not perform this promise. Thus may they be shaken out and emptied. And the assembly said, Amen, and praise the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. I'm aware I didn't move that on slide, but I hope you could hear me reading it. And this was the reading that you were asked to have a look at in advance, along with Matthew, which is perhaps the more familiar version, the more familiar story when we're talking about social injustice. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, who are members of my family, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" Then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." So these readings are very much relevant to the issues that we want to talk about this afternoon. Particularly Nehemiah. In our culture, lending money is a way to make money, and yet those who can least afford things are those who pay the highest interest rates. We've found that many big local projects are only going to be successful if we have people locally who are prepared to make sacrifices. Sacrificial giving becomes essential for those big projects to work. We want justice. Within us, we really want justice. We want the world to be in balance. And yet, are we prepared to do things about it? If there's no justice, we know something's not right. So are these readings about the Last Judgment? I had intended to get you to discuss in breakout rooms what you found from the readings, but on balance, because we are tight for time, we've only got our hour available. What I'm going to do instead is ask you to just think about what those Bible readings say to you, and just throw in a couple of points you might like to bear in mind. I always think the sheep get a really good press, and the goats get a really bad press, which is a bit unfair. But apparently, in the Middle East, sheep and goats used to graze together during the day, but they had to be separated at night because the goats are less hardy and they needed to be kept warm. And apparently, the way you separate the sheep from the goats is to do with their tails. The sheep's tails hang down and the goats' tails hang up. That is nothing to do with social justice, but I just always struggle with that. Why do the goats get such a bad press? Anyway, think about those readings. That's the topic of social justice that we want to move to. So I'm going to invite Will now to take you on a quick run and consideration of any newspaper articles and social issues you've considered. Will.
Great, thanks, Karen. So Karen's helped set the scene with those two bits from the Bible. Interesting verses from different parts of the two testaments. So it's not just a New Testament or Old Testament issue. This is an issue that spans the entire depth of faith. So this seminar is about life not being fair and asks us to think about how we can have a faithful voice in issues of injustice. So hopefully over the last few weeks, you've been looking at the news. I'm sure most of you read the news every day. You get it either through sort of old school news of papers and the TV, or even if you've got a mobile phone these days, you can't help but see on Facebook a whole load of news coming and going every day. And so hopefully you've been looking at those things. What we're going to do in about 4 or 5 minutes is get into breakout groups of 4, where we're going to have 12 minutes, so not long, about 3 minutes each, to talk about the issues that vex us most. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I really wanted to get us to think about what is our faithful voice. One of the problems I've often had trying to explain my passions of social justice and what we might do about it is they happen to be my passions. And therefore, it's really hard for me to tell you guys and girls what actually you should be caring about. So I think if we're going to take that message from Nehemiah and from Matthew seriously, we really have to work out what we are going to be faithful to, because we're all made different. And that's really important, because justice and injustice is so rife across our world and our communities, going from massive global challenges like climate change and global inequality, all the way to very local issues around how we live and how our lives operates. I know when I watch my kids play football, I have a real sense of injustice all the time about the way my sons are treated or otherwise. And so those issues go all the way from the very top of the world to the very bottom, most local things. And so if we as Christians are going to work out how to live everyday lives of faith, we have to work out what are we about, and therefore what are we going to do about it. So what I presume will have happened is, as you read the news, like me, the issues that you care about, you'll notice time and time again. And that's normally because we're dialed into the issues that we care about the most. And so I presume it won't have been too tricky for you to think of an issue to talk about now. And that's because we're all made differently. And if we accept that, we have to understand that we're not all going to have the same issues that we care about. I was on a Zoom call the other day with a number of social projects, and they were discussing how lockdown had been really hard for themselves and how they'd run out of money and all sorts of things. And one of them was an animal sanctuary that was really upset that they hadn't been given any money from the government for their animal sanctuary, because it was such an important part of living well. And it really made me think, that's ridiculous. I'm not sure I care about animals. Why should we worry about that? But as I sat there and looked at the lady who was talking and saw the passion in her eyes and in her voice, it really struck me yet again that in this broad kingdom, the kingdom of God, God relies on all of us to have different issues, and that's what makes it rich. And perhaps this lady's insistence about this animal sanctuary wasn't wrong compared to other issues, but rather was a sign of different people caring about different things. I was thinking last night, I was listening to the song "Take Me Home, Country Roads" by John Denver, an old song. I don't know where it came from. And he sings about his wonderful West Virginia where he lives. He describes the animals, the land, all those things. And it made me think that in the kingdom of heaven, it does include everything. It's not just the dark, gnarly issues, it's the other parts of life. And so as social justice warriors, we may have very local, small causes or very big causes. And it's not for us necessarily to say which ones are important. So Sam's going to put us into breakout groups. We're going to have 12 minutes. So what I'd like you to do is, with the 4 people, there'll be 3 others, just talk about issues that are important to you, compare and contrast. Maybe you'll be in a group with someone whose issues are totally different to yours. That's not a problem. What we want to try and do is have a brief moment to tell somebody else today what you care about. And then when we come back together, we'll think about how we can then take those issues and actually make a real difference. So Sam's going to put you into breakout groups now, and we'll see you all back in about 12 minutes. Great. Well, I hope you had a good time talking in your groups. In the chat function, what I thought would be lovely is if people were able to write while I'm talking and through the rest of the session, their issue, maybe in a word or a couple of sentence, well, a sentence max. It'd be lovely, wouldn't it, to capture a whole range of different social justice issues that we care about. There'll be so many different issues. It'd be great to have that kaleidoscope. So just for a couple of minutes before I hand over to Keisha, I wanted to answer the question, how on earth do we change the world? Because when we think about social justice, we're always asking that question, how do we make the world better? And I've got some good news, because the biggest world changers tended to be individuals that cared about an issue very deeply and then found others that cared about it and then just kept on talking about it, thinking about it, and change happened. The best example, of course, is William Wilberforce. who's a very colourful character. His life before he became a evangelical MP was quite interesting. But when he started to talk about slavery, he was talking to a world that believed slavery was the only option for how the world worked. And so when his single voice, or one of few voices, started talking about it, many people would have thought it's an impossible dream to even go and do anything about it. And yet over the course of a lifetime, he managed to totally transform that entire concept. So for those of us that are interested in actually becoming everyday Christians that maybe have a faith that can change the world, my experience and others that I've known has been that the issues you care about, you're often uniquely passionate enough to actually make a difference about it. So as you move on to Takesha to talk specifically about one issue together, I would like to encourage all of those that are just raising, I can see things coming through in the chat, so many different issues. If that is something you care about and you put time into it, you learn about it, you read about it, you look in the press for issues that demonstrate it, you can make a ginormous difference to the world. And the beauty of being part of a church, a broad church, and across a whole diocese, is that actually you're able to give your voice fully, because there's bound to be others who hold other voices. So we can be true to ourselves whilst attaching these issues and attacking these issues. So I just would encourage you that if you have been talking about something today, don't forget it. You already care about it, so keep talking about it. What we will try and do, I think, is when Lucy does some feedback, we're going to try and get a part of the feedback that you can say what issues you care about. And we're going to try and connect some of you up after today. So look out for that when Lucy sends the after conference feedback. There'll be an opportunity to say, yes, I would like to talk to other people about issues that I care about. So we'll try and find a way of putting you together. But for now, I'm going to pass over to Takesha to talk about her specifics.
Just remember to unmute before I start speaking, so everyone can hear. Thank you very much for having me here today. Life really isn't fair. It's fair to say the lockdown has brought many social issues up to the surface. Poverty in Britain, the inequalities in wealth and health, and the ongoing issues concerning institutional racism. For me, lockdown gave me a time to sit and reflect on these social issues. For the first time, I found myself needing to hold the problems of the world before God and not just be absolved in my own self. It became my goal to spread more awareness to my friends and peers about racism and how it infiltrates its way into normal life without many people realising it. The death of George Floyd created a reaction that few of us could have anticipated. It was a shocking act of violence, but revealed in its wake both large and subtle ways in which Black people are discriminated against in everyday life. Something in me clicked like a switch. It sparked an anger in me that I could no longer bury. I remember sitting with my mum in the kitchen, listening to the 10 o'clock news and breaking down. Life isn't fair, but oh, how I wish it was. A change is going to come, it has to. As a student reading music, I rely heavily on melodic content and really zone in on the values of lyrics. I did a research project in sixth form on music and how it facilitated change in the civil rights movement. One song that resonated strongly with me that I think still holds a lot of merit in today's world is A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. Do give it a listen if you don't already know it. It encapsulated and expressed the optimism for a better world, even in a time as grim as before the civil rights movement. To me, now more than ever, all these songs that were written by such amazing Black artists should be brought back into the spotlight. The messages they hold still very much serve as a reminder as to what needs to change. I feel music is God's voice breaking into the world, moving us and shaping us to live as the people He has made us to be. Growing up Black in Britain undoubtedly had its difficulties. At times, I struggled with finding my own identity. The primary school I went to was predominantly white, and as was my church. I started to notice how I was different. My skin and the colour of my hair. For me, mostly it was my hair that made me feel the most different. From a young age, I was dealing with comments like, "May I touch your hair?" And "It's so big." It never really bothered me until secondary school. And with hindsight, I've begun to really see how the comments made me feel on a deeper level. I was playing for the first team at school, at a fixture, and all my teammates decided they wanted to have their hair in uniform 2 French plaits. I watched them all plait their long, silky, straight hair, while my frizzy mane was up in a bun. I remember when it came to take team photos, they were all asking me, "Why haven't you done yours, Takesha?" I just stayed silent. But I remember my best friend seeing the look on my face and taking hers out, saying, "I don't really like 2 plaits anyways." Only now I realise that my hair is my strength and not just something that makes me different. I think another thing that I find difficult to this day is the way I'm followed around shops by store detectives. It happens all over the place, from Tesco's to Urban Outfitters, as if in some way the colour of my skin equates to a career in shoplifting. If only they could see me as the person that I really am, a flute-playing, life-loving, sometimes sporty, composing, jazz saxophone jamming young woman just trying to walk in the light of God's love. Now more than ever, as we face new challenges, it is the time to turn to God, to live within the radiance of his love as we explore and reflect on the world. I found when I looked back at the aftermath of racist situations that I have experienced, I had got into a habit of brushing them off or just burying them deep inside, instead of taking the time to process and reflect. One particular experience that stays with me to this day was when I was 6, going to my weekly ballet classes. It was a few days before a big recital, and my ballet teacher asked me to step up to the front of the hall to sit down in front of my peers. I was asked to watch them dance so they could all be comfortable, knowing what it was like to dance in front of a black woman. I didn't really understand, because I was only 6, or understand why my mum seemed so cross about it. But over the summer, I began to reflect and began to see how comments and actions like this really do stay with people forever. One thing that I struggle with is having to try so hard to make people feel comfortable in my presence. Speak properly, always smile, always dress well. All of this is done in the hope people won't judge me straight away because of how I look. It's not my job to do this, but sadly in today's world, it is the reality. The change is going to come. How would I challenge injustice? I'm not really an expert, but part of realising who God has made me to be has left me wrestling with how I go about this. Do I go in all guns blazing? Or do I take the overly polite approach, expecting them to suddenly take on board my message due to the fact it was delivered in such an outstanding way? One of the first times I decided to try and educate one of my classmates after him saying some rather questionable comments online, I was told I was being too aggressive and that I was coming across as a bit rude. What I've realised is that most of the time, no matter what approach you do end up taking, you can't change people's minds for them. You can only hope to make them reflect. People find it hard to step into these particular shoes. They are unfamiliar and a bit tight around the toes. So the temptation to look away and to ignore the way that Black people are treated is very easy. After all, things are so much better than they used to be. I'm convinced that in order to make this change that is going to come, the change that must come, we must continue to encourage a fuller understanding. So no more squashing down inside these things that are not right. Show your emotions and speak your truth. It has been a long time coming, but I know a change is going to come. I think we're going to go into breakout rooms. So I've just got a few things to take away and reflect on. Is there something that's happened to you you've never really known how to respond, sort of which approach to take? What has struck you particularly with what I've said today, and how might it change how you respond to others in the future? And has anyone ever judged you on how you look, and how does that make you feel? Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for engaging in those conversations. I hope you'll agree, Takesha does make that really quite powerful in sharing her experience. We thought it was helpful to have a sort of single defined case study for you to talk about. Today's event, the theme has been around being Christian rather than doing Christian. So are all the issues we're covering really about being Christian, or are they simply about being a good human being? We need to make sure that we bring our Christian lives into these issues. Can we be a faithful voice for change? How can we be that faithful voice for change? So if I make sure I get the right thing, there we are. I'm trying to share us, there we are. It doesn't want me to move on to the next slide, is that? Ah, got it. So I just wanted to share with you some of the lessons from lockdown that I think have been reflected through the things that we've been told about, specific longer term issues, and also some of the specific issues that you were talking about in the earlier breakout. So some of the lessons from lockdown that I think are worth taking away from this are that lockdown has exacerbated some of the existing inequalities and injustices, and it's created new ones. Somebody picked up that their topic was people evicting people for non-payment of rent, even when there are no jobs to be had. Lockdowns also slaughtered lots of sacred cows, like how can we possibly exist without the way of life that we used to have? Nature started coming back into our rivers. We've had some wonderful things happen with lockdown, as well as some dreadful things. People's sense of place and locality has become more important to them. People are concentrating more on what's happening in their own places. But there are those who are excluded from society. There are people who no longer have a say. So if those people haven't got a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. That's the homeless, the refugees, the asylum seekers, the people who have economic poverty. It's not always hope that's leading to action, but action that's leading to hope. We can be a voice for change if we choose. Another little story I just wanted to share with you was from Desmond Tutu. People standing by a river, people are falling in, and they've seen somebody falling in the river. They leap in, rescue them, take them to the shore, carry on chatting. A little bit later, there's somebody else in the river. They go and rescue them, pull them out. There comes a point where we have to stop pulling people out of the river. We stop having food banks. We stop needing social security, because we go upstream to find out why they're falling in, and we address those root causes. Optimistic, but it's something to aspire to. So thank you very much for engaging so well in what we've been talking about today. Thank you for engaging with the issues that we've drawn up. Do make sure you have a look at the Faith in Our Community tag on the marketplace. You'll find reference to lots of institutions there and lots of bodies that can make a difference. Projects that the diocese is involved with, Black Lives Matter, Feeding the 5,000, L'Identity, the Nelson Trust, Garras, Say One Thing, Fighting for Justice. There's lots of initiatives. As Christians, we have a voice. We can say something. It only takes one person to change the world. So maybe we can change the world if we try. So with that as a thought, think about what you or your family might like to develop as an action plan. And look at the tab on Personal Shapes for Living. It's something that we can build towards and maybe develop our own action planning. Thank you very much for engaging with this. Keep praying into all those issues that you care about. Keep talking about them to people. That's what gets things done. At 4:30, both bishops, it used to be so easy just to write a plus and an R for an initial for Bishop Rachel. Then we got Bishop Robert as well, which is lovely, but he's also plus R. So both bishops will be with us from 4:30 for the rounding up session, and we very much hope that everybody, if at all possible, will get there. Thank you all very much.